Let's discuss this interesting topic now. Could there be a link between climate change and gender-based violence? From Wednesday, Sonke Gender Justice will host a series of events to explore the gendered impact of climate change. The organization says women are more vulnerable to climate change than men, as they make up the majority of the world's poor and are more dependent on natural resources that are under threat. This forum is also an opportunity to question how far South Africa has come in addressing gender inequality and other forms of social injustice that continue to limit women. Let's discuss this further now. We're joined by Sonke's Policy and Advocacy Unit Manager, Mpiwa Tsanga. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Now, it's an interesting link that has been created here between GBV and climate change. If you could maybe just elaborate on this notion for us before we get into the specifics of what could be done to assist women in this particular regard.
Thank you and good afternoon. As you have just alluded to, yes, certainly there is a link between gender inequality and climate change. And that is because in terms of dependence on natural resources, it's often more vulnerable groups and often more women who are more dependent on natural resources such as water, land, firewood, and more than their male counterparts. That is also because of the gendered roles that we have in terms of domestic work. If we look in the rural areas, it's most often women and girls who are responsible for fetching water, who are responsible for fetching firewood, who are responsible also for tilling the land. Research shows that there are more women in agriculture than there are men. So because of that and the dependence on natural resources, when it comes to the impacts of climate change, which are felt more on natural resources, it is women and girls who tend to be more affected by the negative impact that climate change has. But also it's because when we now look at in terms of the systems that we have in the world, you find that when we look at land tenure systems, they are often skewed against women. Women are the ones who often do not own the land. They own it through association from their fathers, their brothers, their spouses. So you find that when there is challenges in the climate change, they are the ones who are also most affected because they do not have ownership and access to the resources. When they now have to, when water becomes scarce, it becomes women and girls who have to bear the brunt of making sure that there is water in our homes, there's water in their homes, there's firewood. Even when climate change impacts on food production, it is often women and girls who are also more impacted because of their responsibility to prepare food in the home. And they are the people who are first bound to they will serve others, and then they are bound to then run short, or they are bound to be the ones who are shortchanged also in terms of food security when such a phenomenon such as climate change happens. So that is some of the linkages that we can show between climate change and its gendered nature and how it affects the genders disparitively.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose when you listen to the links that you've created, one immediately thinks about what are the possible solutions that can be derived here, because climate change has become almost a permanent part of society, and dealing with climate change will probably be one of the best ways in which we can deal with the disparities that you have described. But it will require to see more women in leadership positions and decision-making positions so that this can happen. But that's the big problem, isn't it? That women are still left behind when it comes to decision-making processes across the world.
Exactly. Indeed, you are right that women are left behind. Women are not as properly represented in decision making spaces where issues around climate change are concerned globally. When we look at the COP conferences that are normally held, it's often men that are sitting at the table. And when we're even looking, even in our country, you find that women are not adequately represented. So as such, when policies and decisions are being made, they do not take into consideration those linkages. And you find that also when we are talking about climate financing, in which different countries across the world have resources to finance or cushion farmers, to cushion people against the impacts of climate change. That climate financing often does not take into consideration the gendered impact and the challenges that women experience in trying to access those resources, because the security that is needed, the collateral security that is needed in accessing these loans, women often do not have. Like I have explained, that when we look at land tenure systems, they do not favor women. So when you now want to go and get a loan so that you can you can be able to drill a borehole, to have an irrigation system, and all such kind of things that are trying to mitigate against the impacts of climate change, you find that the systems do not work in favor of women, because they require the kind of security that women do not have. And also, when you look at, I was giving insight, or in fact, when we're even looking at how we deal with issues like floods and etc., there isn't often that consideration about who is impacted the most when women have to be when families have to be relocated. Women and girls are often the ones who are more vulnerable to being abused, to being raped, even in temporary accommodation. They are the ones who are going to be adversely affected. But often the decisions around that disaster management, women are not there. They're not in those decision-making spaces, and that gendered lens that is needed is often not taken into consideration. So there certainly is need for more participation of women in decision-making spaces, even where issues such as climate change are decided, because they are the ones who are affected the most. And we need gendered laws that take into consideration the gendered impacts of climate change, that are not just a flat-faced, one-size-fits-all kind of approach. Because there's, as I was just showing, there's also a link between climate change and GBV. Women are often violated because they are dependent on people, their families, their husbands, and etc. And also because they're dependent for their livelihoods. When they are impacted, when the effects of climate change affect their ability to sustain themselves, sometimes they often remain in those abusive spaces because they are dependent. So we need a lens that really takes into consideration what are the gendered effects of climate change, how are they impacting different genders, how are they exacerbating gender-based violence. Women and girls are raped on their way to go and fetch water at the borehole or water hole because there is a shortage of water. And when they go there, that's where sometimes would-be abusers wait for them so that they can abuse them. So we need all those issues to be considered.
Thank you very much for those insights, Mpiwa Tsanga, who's the Policy and Advocacy Unit Manager at Sonke Gender Justice, painting a picture between the links between climate change and gender inequality across many societies.